Welcome. I'm glad you came. This is my first webinar, so this is like wow, just learning how to do this. So it's kind of an exciting process. And what I'm going to do today is I'm going to start out by giving an overview of the Ghost Army. Then I'm going to plunge us into Operation Bettembourg and finally talk a little bit about the tour. And I wanted to start out by inviting any Ghost Army veterans or Ghost Army family members to identify themselves on the chat pane down here, because I think people would be interested to know who's here, who's connected with the Ghost Army, and I know that there are a number of you there. So as you're doing that, I will get started, and I want to say that the Ghost Army is a nickname, first of all, for a deception unit called the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops. That practiced deception in the European theater in World War II. Now, a lot of you have probably heard of Operation Fortitude, the great D-Day deception. So the first thing I want to say is this is not that story. This is something else entirely. This is the story of an American unit carrying out deception on the front lines in Europe during World War II. Literally, in order to be able to carry out their deceptions. So these deceptions involved impersonation. In particular, they're impersonating other larger American units in order to fool the Germans about where those units really are. So I'm going to try to impress you with my fabulous drawing skills here and say, let's see, and my technical skills as well. And imagine that this is the front line, and we have a real unit, the 67th Division, that is going to be moving in over here. But what we want to do is we want to pretend that the 66th Division is moving in down here so that the Germans will come down here, right, to face the pretend 67th, and then the real 67th will be able to attack without having much enemy resistance there. And that is basically the idea of what the Ghost Army did. And they did this not once, not twice, but 21 different times. This is the cover of the official history of the unit. This was classified for 50 years. It's in the National Archives. And you can see all around the edges of the unit the insignia of the various various units that they impersonated. And it's 36 insignia if you're trying to count them there real quickly before I change the page to the next one. So how did they carry out these impersonations? Well, this is a multimedia deception unit. Visual, sonic, and radio are the three basic kinds of deception that they went off to war with. And visual deception, of course, involves inflatable dummies that you can use to fool enemy aerial reconnaissance, like this M4 Sherman tank seen here in the factory where it was made. But they didn't just have tanks. They had any vehicle that an infantry or an armored division would have. They had trucks, for example, like this one. And they're going to, this is what the truck looks like. And you can see down here that this is what the truck duffel bags would have looked like before they were inflated. They also had artillery, all different types of artillery, this being one of them. And they had some exotic vehicles too. This is a tank trailer that was used to, tank recovery trailer that they would have. If you have a damaged tank, you need to be able to tow it back to get repaired. So they would have a few of these, because if you've got a couple of these hidden in the woods someplace and the Germans spot them, they're going to think, oh my goodness, there's an armored division around. And they would then hopefully act accordingly. So these vehicles, of course, do not look very realistic close up. But if you get a little bit farther away, it gets a little bit harder to tell. Can you tell which one here is the real one? I don't know how your resolution is on the screen, but if it's good enough, you can probably figure out by squinting at it that the one on the left here, this is the real one. And but this is even closer than we're going to let the Germans get. So imagine that we can take all of these. I'm just hearing, by the way, Carrie, that somebody's not getting sound. But are the other folks still getting sound? So other folks are getting sound, so hopefully the sound is good on our end, and it's just one person who's having a problem. So the idea is that you can take these inflatables and you can paint a 3D masterpiece on the landscape. This is an aerial photo from an operation in March 1945, and it is amazing. It's on the Rhine River near Germany, and every vehicle in this photo is inflated. And I want to let you in on a little secret of deception techniques. What is it that makes this picture look so realistic? And if you look, I think some of you probably would figure it out right away. It is, of course, the tank tracks, right? So if you have a 90-ton Sherman tank, it makes a heck of an impression in the ground. If you have a 40-ton Sherman tank, it makes a heck of an impression in the ground. If you have a 90-pound dummy, not so much. So they had to have a company of combat engineers who would make the tank tracks. And that attention to detail is really what made these deceptions work. So that's the visual deception. They also had a sonic deception. So they had sound trucks, and they would record sound. They recorded a set of sound effects, kind of like a world-class set of military sound effects before they went to Europe. And then while they were in Europe, they could take different sound effects, tanks going up a hill or trucks moving down a road, people building a bridge, and they could mix these all together to make the particular deception that they wanted to see. And they would mix them onto a wire. I don't know if you're even familiar with this technology, but the wire recorder preceded the tape recorder. And this is a wire like the kind that they use. I'm going to hold it close up to the camera and you can see the light reflecting on it. It's about the consistency of fishing wire. And if you get 6 feet of it, which is about this much, you are getting 1 second of sound. So they would record it on these wires, and then they would play it back from these speakers that were mounted on half tracks. So these are 500 speakers mounted on half tracks, and they had a range of about 15 miles. So the sonic was incredibly effective. It often fooled fellow American units as well as fooling German units, and this really was the first time recorded sound had been used in this way. And the Ghostarmy also did radio deception, and the basic idea of radio deception is pretty simple. A real division has a radio network that they're using to communicate internally and with other divisions. They don't have any cell phones, sadly, in World War II. So you can have radio trucks, and you can replicate the same radio traffic that a real division would do. So as the Germans are listening in, and a real division is there. So that is the idea of the radio deception. So these are the first information that they have, and with them they go to Europe to train and to get ready for D-Day. And they arrive in Europe in May of 1944. And they end up coming to, I'm just pushing the wrong button here. They end up coming to a place called Walton Hall, which is a beautiful kind of Downton Abbey-ish type of manor house, not far from Stratford-on-Avon. And this is the first place that they actually worked with the inflatables, because they had taken so long to make them that they didn't get them until they got to Walton Hall. And so what's interesting is that it's actually a hotel now. And so we are able to go there on the Ghostarmy tour, and we work with inflatables there as well. And so it's amazing, to think about it, to be inflating a replica of one of these dummies and to be doing it in the very same place where they first worked with them. Okay, so the units of the Ghostarmy landed in France. The first unit was Task Force Mason. They left on D+8 and landed in Omaha Beach by plane. Some of the other units came in July and August, and by mid-July they were carrying out deceptions here in Normandy. So let's get on to talk about Operation. Actually, before we talk about Operation Bettembourg, they get to Normandy, and they add a fourth dimension of deception, and during the first few operations to what they're doing, and they call it special effects. And the special effects involve physical impersonation of the men in a unit. So if we're impersonating the 75th Division, and we've got trucks, inflatable trucks, and sound and radio, we're also now going to put on a phony shoulder patch of the 75th Division and go out and about amongst the people with that phony shoulder patch in case any spies are watching and checking them out. We're going to put, and these, by the way, I just want to mention, these are some of the actual fake patches they use. These are actually core patches. So you'd have a divisional patch and a core patch. And these were made by a counterfeiting section, and one of the soldiers in that was Seymour Nussenbaum. And I know Seymour signed up for this seminar. Seymour, I don't know if you're out there, but if you are, maybe you can acknowledge to people. These come right out of Seymour's scrapbook, which he actually donated to our nonprofit, the Ghostarmy Legacy Project. And Seymour's 93. He lives in New Jersey. And so they would have these fake shoulder patches. They would also put fake bumper markings on their vehicles and then drive them back and forth through towns. They would set up phony headquarters, and they would have phony MP posts. That is to say, MPs who are not really from that division, but who are pretending to be and who are directing traffic in the different towns. And this would all be a way of convincing leave-behind spies that a certain division is really there. Now, the operations officer of the Ghostarmy, Lieutenant Colonel Clifford Simon, said something really interesting that I came across in the archives. He said that the trick of special effects is that every division has its own personality. So you're trying to replicate the personality of that division to do an accurate imitation of it. And it might come out in their signs, it might come out in the way the soldiers talk, it might come out in all sorts of different ways. And so one of the things that the Ghostarmy did is they would study different divisions to see how they handle things, what kind of markings they put on the helmets of their MPs, how they made their signs, all sorts of details, so that if they were in a situation where they then needed to do this, impersonate this division, they were in a good situation to do so. Okay, so now we've got 4 kinds of deception, and we're going to move on to Operation Bettembourg, which took place September 15th through 22nd, 1944. And Operation Bettembourg is done on behalf of George Patton's Third Army. Now, the Ghostarmy did not do all of their deceptions for Patton. They also did deceptions for the First Army and the Ninth Army. But they did a lot of deception. And you'll also remember that Patton was involved in the Operation Fortitude, the D-Day deception, commanding a fake army back in Europe. Now, Patton has a reputation these days, I would say, as the cantankerous general. He is got the pearl-handled pistols. He's cussing and swearing and all this sort of thing. But the deception planners saw an entirely different person. And here's a quote from Colonel Billy Harris. He's one of the people who helped create the Ghostarmy. He was a deception planner for the 12th U.S. Army Group. And here's what he said about Patton. He was the greatest team player that we ran into over there. He would do anything you asked him to in the interest of the overall picture. So it gives us kind of a really different vision of Patton's generalship. He wanted to win, and he was going to embrace creativity and deception to help him do that. Okay, our Bettembourg story starts on September 14th, 1944, which is a Thursday. And the 23rd is bivouacked outside of Paris. They're in Saint-Germain-en-Laye. They've been there about a week. They are waiting to get the call for the next deception. And that morning, their commander, Colonel Harry Reeder, gets word that they are needed and that he should report to the 12th U.S. Army Group to find out what the mission is. So he puts the word out to the soldiers, puts the soldiers on alert that they're needed, and he and some of his staff officers head over to Versailles, which is where the 12th U.S. Army Group was located. And they probably, when they got there, the first thing they probably did is look at this map. This is the actual 12th U.S. Army Group situation map for September 14th, 1944. It's available in the Library of Congress. It's actually available online along with the situation maps for every day of the war. It's a very dense document, obviously, but roughly speaking, the front line is running about down here. Luxembourg City is in this area. Paris is back over here. Patton has been moving in roughly in this direction, racing across France. And now he's kind of hit the Moselle River and much heavier German resistance. And that's kind of the context of this deception. Let me add some graphic information here and zoom into that part of the map. And you can see that this whole section is the Third Army section here. So the First Army section is up north of there. And Patton is driving his forces towards the heavily defended fortress city of Metz down here. And what happens is now there's a gap in the line that opens up in this area, roughly speaking. And it's actually bigger than it looks here because the 90th Division, which is that division right there, the 90th Division is actually a little bit farther to the south. So you have this area where there's almost no American soldiers. These units here are German units. And this is very dangerous because if the Germans realize that there's this gap in this area, it's about 25 miles long, they are now kind of reorganizing after retreating across France. They might be able to come in through that gap and get around Patton from behind. And that's what Patton wants to avoid. This sector of the front is being held by the 20th Corps under Patton. The 20th Corps was commanded by General Walton Walker. It's the 20th Corps that actually asks for the help of the Ghost Army. There's no real units available, so they're going to bring in the Ghost Army. And let me show you this other map. This is I love maps, so show you another one. And this is the actual operation map that the Ghost Army put together after the operation was done to show what they did. And you can see things more clearly here. This section of the front is basically just being held by the portions of the 3rd Cavalry mechanized. I tell you, they're not on horses. They are mechanized. And they've got basically about 700 men, as I said, holding about 20 miles of the front. So it's virtually undefended. So what the Ghost Army's mission is they are going to come in and they're going to pretend that they are the 6th Armored Division. Okay, so you've got the 3rd Cavalry's already here. The Ghost Army is going to pretend that they are the 6th Armored Division coming in. They're only going to have 500 or so Ghost Army soldiers, but they're going to pretend to be 8,000 with tanks and all sorts of heavy equipment. And it's important to realize as the Ghost Army moves in here that they have no tanks, they have no artillery, they have no weapon heavier than a 50 caliber machine gun. So they are going to be completely defenseless if the Germans break through and try to attack them. So their goal is twofold. One, it's to keep the Germans from realizing how thinly defended this section of the line is, but it's also to see if they can't draw away some German troops from Metz to make it easier for Patton as he's attacking the fortress city of Metz. So it's kind of a dual goal, right? Part of it is to attract enemy attention, but not too much enemy attention. We don't want them to break through. Pretty typical Ghost Army mission. So they pull out of Paris at about 4 p.m. on the 15th. They spend the night in Chalon in France. They arrive in Luxembourg on the afternoon of they left on the 14th. They arrive on the afternoon of the 15th. They actually, in some of the towns in Luxembourg that they were traveling through, they were the very first American unit to come through that area. So people are lining the roads and cheering for them, having no idea that they're sort of cheering on this secret unit that's rushing to the front to help out General Patton. So the first elements of the Ghost Army arrive in Bettembourg, which is a town about 15 miles south of Luxembourg City, at about 4 p.m. On the afternoon of the 15th. I want you to just think for a minute about how amazing it is. They have deployed in 24 hours. In 24 hours, they have gone from not knowing they needed to do a deception to making a plan for a deception, then organizing all of the soldiers to hit the road, traveling 248 miles across France and Luxembourg, and coming up all the way to the front lines, virtually 2 or 3 miles, a few miles from the front lines in Luxembourg. It's incredible that they were able to move this fast. You know, not every deception got to have a big long lead time and a long plan. This is one where they really had to improvise and do it on the run. So they arrive about 4 p.m. and I think it's really cool. I've recently been able to pinpoint the places that they moved into when they arrived in Luxembourg, arrived in and around the town of Bettembourg. And I want to share with you this map that I put together. What I did is I took the Ghostarmy maps, they're overlay maps, so you had to overlay them over the official U.S. Army map and get the map coordinates correct. But then I was able to figure out where they went and transfer that information to Google Maps. And I actually have, I'm going to share with you a link here. You can look at this information in a little bit more detail after the discussion today on Google Maps. So this is where Combat Command A, so that's one of they're impersonating two combat commands, Combat Command A and Combat Command R. So it's CCA and CCR. Combat Command R is Combat Command Reserve. And so this is where Combat Command A was, and you'll see here that they're not just in a big clump. Here we are, Combat Command A. They are actually being very specific. Now, here's where the 6th Armored Headquarters is. Here's where the 9th Armored Infantry is. Here is where the headquarters is of Combat Command A. Here's where the 12th Armored Artillery is. So they are impersonating different units, subunits in these different sections. Again, attention to detail is very important. And we are actually working now to put up a historical marker in this area. It's one of the things the Ghostarmy Legacy Project is working on, and we hope to dedicate that when we're out there with our tour in September. So it's startling how fast they deploy. They arrive there at 4 p.m. Very quickly, they are putting up tanks. Even by 8 or 9 o'clock that night, they have tanks set up in the area. They put up about 23 inflatable tanks, some in that location I just showed you, some a couple of miles to the east in Rosser. And then there's a quick meeting of the Sonic officers at 6:30 p.m., so just a couple of hours after they've arrived. And by 10 o'clock that night, they are putting on their first Sonic show. They have about 35 Sonic trucks that are playing in Combat Command A, making it seem like they're moving into this area. And then they move the Sonic trucks, and at about 3 a.m., they play in Combat Command R. So they make it seem like both these units are moving in if the Germans are listening. Now, some of the officers of the 3rd Cavalry apparently didn't get the word about this deception. And we know this because Dick Syracuse, who was an officer in the Sonic Company, tells a great story. He's out there that night with the Sonic trucks, making sure there's a perimeter around the trucks so nobody can get too near them. And out of the darkness, he says, looms this lieutenant colonel, and he's got a harness with hand grenades hanging from it, and he's very angry. And he says, "What the hell's going on here, son?" And Syracuse says, well, what are you talking about, sir? And he says, well, what the hell are all these tanks doing here? There's not supposed to be any tanks here, because they can hear the sound of tanks moving through the area. And Syracuse says, well, sir, there actually aren't any tanks in this area. And at that point, it's expletive deleted city. You know, you goddamn, I can hear tanks. Don't try to tell me there aren't any tanks here. Well, Syracuse eventually calms him down. Turns out he'd missed the briefing, right? There's always that guy who misses the briefing. His last words to Dick Syracuse were, well, son, you could have fooled me. So it's a pretty fair bet that if you're fooling your fellow soldiers, you're also fooling the Germans as well. Now, in addition to the sonic and the visual, you also have radio. They set up radio also that first night. Just a note on the radio deception. You know, it sounds really simple. We'll pull in, we'll turn on a transmitter. But again, it's just not that simple. A real division is going to have a network where they are talking to each other on certain frequencies and using certain call signs. And they're going to have other networks where they communicate to other outfits nearby. So they're setting up their phony network for talking to themselves, and they're setting up other phony networks for talking to the other divisions. But once again, this is operating. They just get one net set up that night. By the next day, they've got 10 transmitters operating 6 different networks. So it's a complex effort in order to put the fake message out. So within hours, as you've seen, they've got the whole thing cooking with sonic and visual and radio. And now the next morning, bright and early, no rest for the weary here, they're going to start working on special effects. So the first thing is they're up early and they're running around making fires, setting campfires to make it seem like 8,000 men are having breakfast here as they've moved in. And I love this because this is about the oldest form of military deception that I know of. This predates the Trojan horse. It's one of the earliest things that people did is set the phony fire so then he sees the smoke and thinks that there's a lot of people there. So at the same time that they're starting these fires, they are also sewing on the shoulder patches on their uniforms. All the men are given a short history of the 6th Armored Division so that if they're talking to people in the towns, they know all about it, they can talk about it. And then they put bumper markings. They paint the bumper markings on their trucks and on the sonic off track. So the sonic guys don't get to sleep in the day after they've done their nighttime deception. They have to be up to do special effects in the day. And they start moving these vehicles back and forth through the towns to be seen by any enemy spies that might be left behind. This is a painting by one of the Ghostarmy soldiers, Arthur Shillstone, a very talented painting. A lot of artists who served in the 603rd Camouflage Engineers, which was the visual deception arm of the Ghost Army. And some of the men were sent into towns pretending to be on recreation leave, and they're going into cafes and bars, and they're setting what I think we would call now fake news, right? This is definitely the original fake news outfit. They set up a water point in Bettembourg. So what's a water point? Well, you have a division, in this case, part of a division, 8,000 soldiers. You need to be able to provide them water because where you're going, there may or may not be fresh, clean water available. So they've got trucks set up to provide water. So they have a fake water point. And the Ghost Army is going to the water point and carting water back as if they're bringing water back to 8,000 men spread out over the area, probably dumping it out in the woods someplace. But these are all the kinds of things they did. They had, they also put MPs at all the intersections in 6th Armored markings directing traffic. So you've got a very visible presence here, and the senior officers were very happy to see that civilians were observing, asking questions, taking notes, taking pictures. Now on this second day of the deception, there was one big problem. One of the inflatable tanks was spotted by a civilian in a buggy and saw 4 guys lifting this inflatable tank. This is a portion of another painting by Arthur Shillstone. And so they decided this was taken very seriously by the senior officers. There was an investigation, and they decided that they would take down most of the dummies after 24 hours and not use them for the rest of the operation. So by the next day, the third day of the operation, or a couple of days in here, September 17th, we're in full swing. There's rumors going around that day that the Germans are moving units from Metz to come up to face them. A German soldier surrenders to the unit, indicating that in fact there are German forces nearby. And now that they're this close to the German border, special effects has become really important because they think there might be spies reporting on them. And so here in Operation Bettembourg, one of the special effects ploys they use, I think this is the first time they did it, is they impersonate a major general. They impersonate the commander of the 6th Armored Division. Of course, it's against all Army regulations to impersonate a general, but they considered it critical for their success. If you have a division there, you need to have a general running around that people see. Otherwise, it won't be really believable. Remember, we are in the theater business. If we can't do a complete job, we might as well give up. You can't portray a woman if bosoms are hidden. And so Fred Fox's memo won the day, and they had permission to do this. So in this particular operation, what they did is they set up a convoy of Jeeps, and one of the Jeeps had the distinctive, what they call the red tab license plate of a major general. They had two Jeeps full of guys with machine guns, and they are roaring around in Luxembourg and France, visiting the fake places where the Sixth Armored supposedly is, the little fake headquarters that they've set up all around. And they go further than that, and I think this is what really makes this story wonderful. They went to a tavern that was operated by a suspected collaborator with the Germans, and they roar up and they pull up to this tavern, and they the guy impersonating the general sends his aide, who's played by Fred Fox, into the tavern, and they liberate 6 cases of cognac and bring it back out and drive off. And of course, the tavern keeper is really angry. He's got a great incentive now to inform the Germans that the commander of the 6th Armored Division is in the area. And Fred said that about this, he said the only thing that made him nervous about this deception was that the idea that they might accidentally run into another general on the roads there, and the game would be up as they'd all be arrested for doing what they're doing. So Bettembourg was supposed to last 2 days, but it stretched on because the 83rd was delayed. 83rd Division was delayed in getting there, and every passing day increased the risks. One Ghostarmy soldier said, basically there was nothing between us and the German panzer divisions except our hopes and prayers. And so by the time you get to September 21st, German units have been spotted moving in across the river. The enemy is regrouping and becoming really aggressive. You've got, so Germans are spotted moving in here, and now you've got German patrols that civilians are reporting that are going here. And it's a very kind of crazy situation. Are they going to be caught? Are they going to be found out? Shots are heard at this point in the distance. There's some exchanges of gunfire. Telephone wires are found cut. So they're getting very nervous continuing this deception. Now, one of the soldiers, Bob Tompkins, kept a diary. It's a little tiny diary. It was about this big, a little address book, completely illegal, completely against regulations to keep a diary in the secret unit. And his entry for this day is very telling. Still continued to maintain fires and general activity. Heine patrols reported about 3 or 4 miles away. Platoon of the 406th went out to look for them. That's the 406th Combat Engineers, one of the parts of the Ghostarmy. Civilians seem to be getting too anxious about our setup. We should have moved out a couple of days ago, but attack seems imminent, so I guess we have orders remaining until it begins. Tompkins was not the only one feeling the pressure at this point. So was this guy, George Patton, because he writes to his wife on the same day. And now I can't talk about the Ghostarmy in a letter to his wife, but read between the lines. He is. There is one rather bad spot in my line, said Patton, but I don't think the Huns know it. By tomorrow night I will have it plugged. Jimmy Pope is holding it now by the grace of God and a lot of guts. And what's unsaid there is he's holding it also with the help of the Ghostarmy. Polk, of course, you remember, class, he's the commander of the 3rd Cavalry, the unit that's in the area with the Ghostarmy. He wrote to his wife as well, and his words, equally guarded, are equally revealing. When I tell some of the tales of this business, when all of the war is over, the present situation will be just unbelievable. I have command of the damnedest army that has ever gotten together, as I have had a lot of extra units added to my outfit. I do wish I could tell you about it, as it is absolutely crazy. Finally, on Saturday, September 22nd, the 83rd Infantry was ready to move in to hold the line for real. To preserve the deception, they used the sonic to play them out. They used radio to play them out. So if the Germans were listening in, they would think that the 6th Armored had moved and the 83rd had moved in. Patton's line held, and the Ghost Army slipped away. Now, Operation Bettembourg was, according to the operations officer of the Ghost Army, really their first really effective operation. He said, "It was our first operation that was executed fully, professionally, and correctly." And you know, Jimmy Pope has a street named after him in Bettembourg, Rue de James Hilliard Pope in Bettembourg. But he wouldn't have had that street named after him, and he wouldn't have been able to succeed in this operation but for the Ghost Army. So it's great that we're going to be able to put up a historical marker there and give them some credit. And maybe the best kind of valedictory that I have for Operation Bettembourg is something that somebody said to me after a screening of the Ghost Army documentary once. He said, a man came up to me, very tall, was an elderly man, stood very erect, and he said, "I was a tanker. I was a tanker under Patton at Metz, and I never heard of the Ghost Army, but I think I might have just seen a film about a unit that saved my life." And that's the magic, right? That's the magic of the Ghost Army. You know, we know that they saved lives. We know that by what they did, that lives were saved. And here I was meeting somebody whose life might have been saved by this operation, by keeping the Germans away from Metz, by drawing attention away, by preventing them from getting behind, that he might have helped save the So that's Bettembourg is one of the stops on our tour. This is what it looked like then. This is what it looks like now in that wooded area where CCA was bivouacked. This is the then and now composite picture I put together, so you can see how similar it really is to the way it looked then. And it's so great to be able to go to the place and know that you are there at the place where it happened. And I just want to briefly say that the tour that we do, and we're doing one in September, and we still have room on it. We follow the Ghost Army from England all the way to Germany. You saw the pictures of us at Walton Hall. We also stop in England at Bletchley Park, part of the Secret War, the Code Breaking Center. We visit the Suffolk House, which was Eisenhower's headquarters for D-Day, and we take the boat across the channel just like they did, slightly more comfortable, but we take a ferry across the English Channel, spend a couple of days in Normandy. You know, we don't just tell the story of the Ghost Army. I mean, the Ghost Army, the guys in the Ghost Army all had 5 campaign stars. That unit was in every campaign that took place in Europe between June 44 and April 45. They were everywhere and involved in everything. So we are not just trying to tell the story of the unit on this tour, but story of the war and the fighting that they were part of. And we have some serendipitous occasions too on the tour. This is a woman, Marie France, who we met in the town of Treviere, and she said, "Come visit my house," which is right off of Omaha Beach. It's the only surviving house that was there during the war. And she literally made coffee for us at her house. We've gone back with each of the tours now, and she has this amazing story about the time bomb that the Germans put in the basement of the house and how it was discovered. And so, you know, there's so many interactions and so many things that go on the tour that really help you to learn more about the unit and the context of it. This is where they were bivouacked in Normandy, in Luxembourg. This is the seminary building where they stayed. And in Luxembourg, we also visit the cemetery where George Patton is buried. And Patton's not the only person buried there. George Peddle, who served in the Ghost Army and was killed in one of their last operations, is also buried there. And we always put a wreath at his grave when we visit. And we visit Bastogne as well, and the sites surrounding the Battle of the Bulge, which are very, very moving and help us to understand everything that the Ghost Army was involved with trying to help happen. So that's my spiel. I went a little long, and I apologize for that. I am happy to take questions, and I will see how they work with typing them in here, because if I get a million at once, I don't know how I'll see them, but let's give it a shot. What kind of questions might you have? Oh, I don't, as you're putting the questions up there, please start typing them in. I would add that we also We don't spend all of our time on battlefields. You know, we do eat and drink and have a very good time on the tour. And so plenty of enjoyment there, as well as we discuss all the things that we've been seeing and learning more about them from each other. Okay, I'm sitting back and seeing what we've got. I'm talked out. I'm watching to see, it looks like some typing is happening and typing. Make my screen bigger here so I can see more of these messages. Oh. Okay, well, thank you, Nathan. I'm glad you enjoyed. Appreciate your being there. No questions from Nathan. How many seats are still available for the 2018 tour? Well, Bob, for you, you can have a standing position, but we have plenty of room still. I would say we have at least a dozen places still available in that tour. Where can I find information apart from your book and movie? Why would you want to find information apart from my book and film? Okay, no, serious answer now. There are other books written about the unit. The two that I think are the best, one is by John Gaughan. It's called Ghosts of the ETO. And another is called, it's by Phil Gerard, and it's called Secret Soldiers. And those books are both available on Amazon. If you're wanting to do primary research, the records of the Ghostarmy are at the National Archives in College Park, Maryland. And if you email me at some point offline, I can kind of give you the information you would need to be able to go there and access them, because the National Archives is open to anybody. You can walk in and get a researcher card and go up and look at these pieces of information. So those are a few places that you can go for information on the story. Did the Ghostarmy ever get close to the 4th Cavalry, asks John Cooper. I am not aware, John. I know the 3rd Cavalry they were deeply involved with in this operation. What's also an interesting sidelight, if I can be like a politician and answer a question completely different from the one you asked, is that Billy Harris, who was one of the deception planners, he ended up commanding the 7th Cavalry in Korea. And of course, you know, the 7th Cavalry was Custer's outfit back in the day, but it's a mechanized cavalry at the time of the Korean conflict. He commanded it, and he mounted a saddle on the front of his Jeep as kind of the signal that we're going to be gung-ho, we're going to follow in the 7th Cavalry traditions. They did not follow in the tradition of getting massacred. They actually did quite well in Korea. Well, listen, I'm going to wrap this up and say thank you very much for coming and point out, as Carrie has pointed out, that this will be posted on YouTube. If you can't save it on your computer, there still will be a way to look at it and share it later. And we'll try to get an email out to all of you with the link so that you can share it with other people, or so that the people who had technical problems today can see it. Thank you very much for joining us today, and thank you so much for your interest in the Ghostarmy.